My name's Barbara Mensah. I'm a circuit judge and I sit hearing mostly criminal cases, but I also do mental health review tribunals, and I also sit on the parole board. So I'm looking at offending from 3 different points of view. When I sit in mental health, I sit as what is called a restricted patient judge. So it's usually those people with mental health problems who've committed a criminal offence. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I was a late comer to the law because my university degree was in philosophy, not law. So obstacles I faced were the delays in getting to law. I had to do a conversion course first, then I decided to do a master's, and then I came to do law. I decided to go down the route of becoming a barrister, so I had to find chambers and then practice. It was difficult to find chambers in those days, and I suspect that students now will say it's just as difficult to find chambers. The main difficulties were not so much in ethnicity, but in gender. So there were a lot of chambers who simply would not take women. They gave you excuses such as that their clients didn't like dealing with women because they were perhaps shipping or commercial chambers. I don't know how true these excuses were, or that they were worried that you as a woman would go off and have a child, and so they'd lose your work for a period of time whilst you're on maternity leave. So those were the sort of obstacles that people were facing back then. The first one is training. Before I became a circuit judge, I also sat on various tribunals. One of those tribunals was the Immigration Tribunal. And I was put in charge when I started at that tribunal in the year 2000 of training for adjudicators. And for me personally, that was my biggest achievement, because before then, we didn't have what is fairly standard now in terms of training, which is small group sessions, case studies and things like that. Training tended to be one person standing on a platform and lecturing to a group of judges. And so I was dealing with training and modernizing training, and I'm very proud of my achievement in that. It's not known beyond the Immigration Tribunal, I'm afraid. I suppose the second thing that I'm very proud about, though I have to admit that I didn't set it up, another judge set it up, is a scheme that is aimed at prolific offenders. And it is very closely monitored by a judge, which is myself at the moment. I didn't set it up, I inherited it from another judge, and a team including police officers and probation officers. And we monitor particular individuals completely all the time, intensively, and they see the judge regularly, and it keeps them from offending. And I'm very proud of that scheme. I wish, in fact, we could roll it out all around the country. I'm that proud of it, or proud to be a part of it. Don't want to suggest that I started off the scheme at all. There is no face that does not fit that of a judge. Any face can be a judge. Anyone can become a judge. Diversity is important and it matters. If you take the attitude that your face doesn't fit, then you would be depriving the judiciary and ordinary citizens of engaging you and presenting the variety that the judiciary needs. So what you need to think about is not so much that your face doesn't fit, but what your talents will bring to the judiciary, because everybody has something different to offer to the judiciary. The world would be a very silent place if there were no birds singing except those who sang the best. And when I was invited to join the be a judge, the first tribunal I was invited onto was a financial regulation tribunal. I knew nothing about financial regulation. And when I told the person who invited me that I didn't know anything about financial regulation, he said, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be a genius at financial regulation. What they're looking for is other characteristics, such as being fair-minded, being objective, those sort of things. So don't think of it in terms of your face doesn't fit. Think of it in terms of what talents can I bring to the judiciary. For me personally, it is a period of celebration and reflection. I came to Black History Month rather late, in the sense that Black History Month has been going on for absolutely decades. And I first became really involved with it when I was invited by the Law Society to speak at their first event for Black History Month, which was in 2009. So I did an awful lot of research for it at the time because I didn't know very much about it. And I came up with all sorts of interesting facts, such as the first ethnic minority to attend Lincoln's Inn was an ambassador from Morocco in the 16th century. And then since then, I've found out so much positive about ethnic minorities and about Black people in particular. And so Black History Month is important because it gives you a fuller and accurate picture of history. And history needs to be taught honestly, and that involves including Black lives as well. So this period, this October month, which is dedicated to Black history, is a period of time for all of us, not just Blacks, but all of us to stop and reflect. We know about the Black people who appear in the press all the time. We may not know about those that appear in the press less often. So it's an opportunity for us to do some investigation and find out how Black people have been in this country, have been famous for all sorts of things all over the centuries. I think it's important because it gives confidence to those who don't have confidence, and it gives knowledge to those who don't have knowledge. It's important to celebrate it because people think that, well, Black people only came into European history or United Kingdom history in the last century, or that they were slaves in previous centuries, but they never did anything at all until more recently when they've been musicians or athletes or whatever. And the Black history makes you stop and think, and you realize that actually they've been here a long time and they haven't all been slaves under the radar that nobody knows about, but some of them have been very prominent in their own right, but simply haven't been brought to prominence in the history books. So we have John Blank, who is at the Hampton Court Palace now. If you go there, you'll see that he, in the time of Henry VIII, was a trumpeter. So here he was, a slave, but he was allowed to be a musician to the king, and he was able to write directly to the king and get a response back from the king. There have been musicians, classical musicians from 200-300 years ago who we would never have heard of, but Black History Month and Black Lives Matter have brought them to prominence because people have done inquiry, they've done investigation, and they've seen that actually we have had Black people all through history who have been people who have contributed significantly to the culture and history of the country, but have been forgotten. So it's very important, I think, from that point of view. Inspirational figures, I would say, are people like Martin Luther King. This was a man of faith and courage. He is tremendously inspirational. He was a preacher and he took up the civil rights movement, first of all because of Rosa Parks, and then went along with it until, sadly, his early and untimely, unfortunate death. But he is inspirational for the courage that he's shown. If I had even a fraction of that amount of courage, I would be proud of myself. John Blank, who I've already mentioned, who was a trumpeter in the court of Henry VIII, a man with spirit and conviction. Imagine that at the time. There couldn't have been very many Black people around. Here he was a trumpeter, I think perhaps the only musician in the court of Henry VIII. And then he saw that he was being treated worse than other trumpeters. He was being paid less. And so he wrote a letter to Henry VIII and complained about that. And Henry VIII wrote back, there's records of this if you go to Hampton Palace, and he said, can you increase my pay? He wrote it all very respectfully and said, I don't get paid enough and I don't get paid as much as the others. And Henry VIII increased his pay. And I just think, here's a man with spirit and courage and conviction. He knew what was right. He shouldn't be paid less. And he went for it and it had a positive result. And then Mary Seacole, a woman with humanity and determination. She's also an inspiration. If you go to the museum, you find out, I didn't know this until very recently, that I knew that she had been rejected. This was at the same time as Florence Nightingale, who was able to go to help those in the Crimean War. Mary Seacole was rejected, but that didn't put her off. She didn't think to herself, well, okay, they got Florence, they don't want me, I'll go and find something else to do. She thought, people need me. And so she apparently went and set up a hotel. And People came to the hotel. She had music and food, but also, of course, there were a lot of wounded men from the war, and they all required treatment, and she was able to treat them. So she found her way around herself of getting to where she wanted to be, which was to help other people, help humanity, help those who were injured in the war. And she was determined to do it, despite her colour, despite her rejection. She was determined to do it. So those three in particular are three that I would pick out for Black History Month as being incredibly inspirational in their different ways. For Black History Month, it ought to be 12 months a year instead of 1 month a year. And I think that it's just History Month. I did history at O level, GCSE level, and it was an okay subject. But now, through the interest in Black history, I am incredibly interested in history. I find myself picking up things mostly about Black people, because it was Black people that Black History Month that inspired it. But really, history could be made a lot more interesting. And if when I retire, I'm still able to do so, and I feel like going back to study again, history, I think, is a subject that I'd go and study as an option and try and get a degree in. I'm waiting for the day when we have History Month every month of the year rather than a Black 1 month of the year.